There we go. I have excellent. I have them both on the screen. Can you both hear me, gentlemen?
Yes, I can.
Hello. Hello.
Wonderful. Everybody, we have Justin Walker and Sir Julian Rose on the screen, co-founders of the Hardwick Alliance for Real Ecology. Love that. What's going on here? So let's set the scene for everybody, gentlemen. Why did you first come together in hair, as it's also aptly titled? What happened? What's this all about?
Go on, Julian.
Well, I think we were probably both greens, genuine variety. And we didn't really know about each other until quite recently, really 2 years ago. I was aware a little bit about Justin's work on issues to do with common law, justice, and the monetary situation. And he was perhaps dimly aware of my existence as an organic farmer since 1975, actually.
Wow.
But when we did get together, we found there was a very large area of common thinking and doing in our approach to life.
Well, that sounds like a brilliant start to a union, frankly. And you've sent an open letter, obviously, to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt. And you call for immediate action required by His Majesty's government to prevent the globally planned collapse of the British economy. There are a lot of words going on there that are of great interest to me. So let's start breaking this down. You describe this as a so-called cost of living crisis. You describe it as a planned collapse of the British economy. Who'd like to explain that to me?
Well, we know that the World Economic Forum exists. We know there's no conspiracy theories here. Let's get this one put to bed immediately, that we are not talking any theories, we're talking facts. The World Economic Forum exists. They meet annually at Davos. You've got these billionaire megalomaniacs, and that's what they are, and they are designing a future for humanity. And if you want an example of what this future looks like, look at China. Because there you have artificial intelligence, you've got central bank digital currencies, allied with a social credit scheme. And what we're rapidly seeing there is a thing called a technocracy, where technology runs your lives. In other words, you as people cannot have any decision. Well, you cannot make any decisions. The state does it all for you. And most times it's done by artificial intelligence. So you're not even dealing with human beings. Right. That is what's coming down the road very fast indeed.
And this is under the guise of the Great Reset. Obviously, we've heard the buzzwords, build back better, they tell us. And obviously, the World Economic Forum is very well known amongst our viewers. Less well known is possibly the Bank for International Settlements. Who is this?
This is something which amazes me. I was told about the Bradbury Pound, which we'll come on to. And that alerted to me basically to that banking wasn't what it seems. Then I read a lady called Ellen Brown, a researcher in America, and suddenly this bank called the Bank for International Settlements emerged onto the scene. And it was started in 1930 by a governor of the Bank of England called Montague Norman with Hitler's finance minister, Thomas Schlacht. And this is the central bank for all the central banks. It was originally built, and it's quite appropriate we say this on November the 11th, that this was actually put in place to handle war reparations after the First World War. But the hidden agenda was to become a central bank for all the central banks. So effectively today, the Bank for International Settlement oversees over 60 central banks directly, including the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank. And it oversees over 95% of money creation and money supply.
Wow.
Yeah, and nobody's heard of it. I've had 25 MPs I've talked to in the last 10 years. Not one of them knew anything about it.
Julian,
you know, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because
yes.
I think what it seems to show is that basically the banking system as a whole is in private hands. And I think a lot of us think that the banking system is actually, or especially the Bank of England, the Fed in America, is a sort of government or institutionally run, but they're not. They're entirely private. So there is very little distinction, actually, in many respects, between the top end of the pyramid and banking. In fact, I would say they really are the master control people.
Well, and that's interesting because the whole point about Rise is not to do news on a surface level. We don't do that. We like to go behind the scenes. Who's pulling these strings? What is that all about? That's what our viewers demand. And that's what we're giving you right here, because it's vital that we know this stuff. I literally, when I read your letter, which is a powerful letter, I'm making an assumption here, but I'm assuming you haven't heard anything back.
That's quite an assumption. Very accurate.
Oh, hate to be accurate on these things.
This is an open letter because the whole point of it is to educate people, because ignorance is the shield that protects the criminal and the globalists who are trying to enslave us. That's the bottom line. And the Bank of International Settlements is an important aspect to it, as is the World Economic Forum. But, you know, we the people can overturn this in a moment if we just woke up to what money creation really is. And the money creation should be in public hands. And we did it in August 1914 with the Bradbury Pound, which we'll come on to.
We will come on to.
Yeah, and they know this, and it's their Achilles heel.
Right. So in terms of where we've just come from, we've had 2.5 years, an appalling 2.5 years. And how much has that whole COVID narrative and what took place, lockdown, etc., played into this moment?
Well, essentially, what you got there, excuse me, is a system reflecting, I should say, a system of total control, which has been planned for a very long time. In fact, you know, we keep finding earlier and earlier and earlier examples of this control system. And the essence of this control system is a very, very small elite. Most of the people on your program, of course, know this information. And know that there's even a connection with bloodline families and people wanting to behave like God when they're actually at the opposite end of the spectrum from God. But that unfolding of this power complex has only been able to happen because we, the people, have stepped back from our natural responsibility at the local and regional level to manage our lives and manage our communities and manage our food and manage everything else that we need. This never could have happened if we hadn't been hypnotized into believing that this elite actually does have power and actually does know things we don't know, whereas it's actually the opposite. You know, you ask anybody at the top end of that pyramid anything about food and farming or about health on a deeper level, and they don't know anything about it at all.
Well, I wasn't aware that you were an organic farmer, Julian, but it's fascinating that you are, of course, because what we're hearing and receiving right now is we should be eating bugs as opposed to meat. What do you think about that?
I didn't catch it. Say one more time.
What we're hearing now, certainly coming from the World Economic Forum, is that we should be eating bugs rather than meat.
Oh, yes,
because
indeed.
Obviously meat, they say, is the problem in terms of climate change, which we'll get onto as part of the whole subterfuge of this all. But what do you feel as an organic farmer is going on there?
Well, basically, there's an attempt being made to put farming into a virtual reality world of petri dishes, laboratories, vertical farming, right, with no soil involved, just water and chemicals. In other words, the idea being put across is that you can only save the environment by removing farming from it. You know, it's an utterly bizarre concept. And of course, as an organic farmer, ecological farmer, I'm very aware after 35 years of practical work on my farm that by nourishing the soil, by nourishing biodiversity and diversity of all the species, you actually improve the quality of nature bit by bit by bit. It's a slow process. You're also taking out when you're selling crops and you're selling stuff off the land. But we have got a system running now, which at least should be seen in the long term to support the continuation, fertility of the soil, biodiversity of the planet, and for people who love the idea about global warming, a balanced sense of weather for a change. That would be very nice.
That would be very nice indeed. And what you mention in this, just carrying on from that point you're making, and what you mention in this letter, Justin, is that there is a drive to destabilize the governance of sovereign nations. And you say that they are using the climate change pseudoscience to do so in this whole idea of a fake Green New Deal. This is all contributing to the crisis, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I went along. I joined the Ecology Party, as it was, back in 1978, when the Green movement had real values. In fact, the very first party, the Green Party in the world, was called the Values Party, and that was in New Zealand. But suddenly we were hijacked, and I didn't know at the time that I was being hijacked, but suddenly we were being taken down the path that CO2 was bad. CO2 is the gas of life, as Julian will tell you. You want more, not less. I mean, the whole thing is so ridiculous. But the best one is when you ask people, what is the percentage of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere? And I've talked to Extinction Rebellion and all these people, and I get figures like 10%, 20%, 30, 40, 50% even. And it's 0.04%. They don't even know. The bandwagon that's going along is driven once again by ignorance.
Yes.
And this is the frightening thing. Education has been hijacked, and we've got to get education back too.
And when I read your letter, I felt a sense of relief reading it, because it was completely in accord with my thoughts and feelings about what I've observed over the last few years. And so you start by saying, and this is not an overstatement in any respect at all, but you're saying that it's an instruction that is supported by the overriding supremacy of the common law, as we are dealing with criminal fraud and deception on a truly massive scale. And you address that to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Are you implicating them in this massive fraud?
Absolutely, 100% I am, I'm afraid, because they belong, there is a network of think tanks and secret societies, Bilderberg, Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Pilgrim Group, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, also known as Chatham House, the Committee of 300, the Committee of Three. I could go on, and this is where you have very powerful people, politicians, academics, you get scientists and all sorts of people meeting in secrecy to decide the fate of humanity. And I'm sorry, this is going on. We know it's going on. And it cannot, we've got to have accountability and transparency. You can't have this sort of elitism going berserk, where just a few can dictate to all of us. And unfortunately, it's our ignorance. Once again, I emphasize it's our ignorance that is allowing this to happen.
Absolutely. And this week, of course, we've had COP27, which is such a farce and absolutely ridiculous. They want us to eat bugs while they're eating, obviously, a la carte, and they're arriving in their private jets. It's absolutely ridiculous. But one of the things you say in here, which I wasn't aware of, and I suspect many of our viewers won't be as well, and it regards His Holiness Pope Francis and instructing the Holy See to move all financial assets to the Vatican Bank by the end of September. What was that about?
Well, I wish we know. I mean, what we do know is, well, a lot of researchers, it's a fascinating area, this, and I'm actually writing a paper on it at the moment. But you've got 3 states within states. You've got the Vatican, you've got the City of London, and you've got Washington, the District of Columbia. Now, very strangely, all these institutions are states within states. And the Vatican has always been an integral part of the, if you like, the overall conspiracy in inverted commas. And some people actually say the Vatican actually controls the Bank for International Settlements. I've not totally seen that yet, but I can understand where they're coming from. There's a lot of we've got to penetrate a lot of disinformation, misinformation to get to the truth, but we're getting there.
Right. Julian, you talk about a growing consensus that at some point in the coming months, we are going to have that planned collapse of the global economy. We'll have unsustainable debt, financial chaos, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, just paint us a picture of what can potentially happen as a consequence of all these actions.
Well, you know, I don't have a personal sense of a massive crash happening tomorrow. And when you do hear stories about people coming up with various dates when the economy is going to be taken apart and everything's going to collapse, I think actually they're very shrewd these people who are running the show. They're actually more shrewd than we are, most of them. They're just not human or any badly human.
Right.
So essentially, I think what they'll do is they'll cut the small veins rather than go for the jugular. And that's already started. Actually, it's been going on since COVID. And it's increasingly associated with blaming Russia, blaming China, blaming the war in Ukraine, blaming almost anything other than the fact that the manipulation is taking place by political entities connected up with large corporations, the banking business, and the industrial weapons market, which is making a fortune at the moment. So actually what they will do is they'll snip and snip and snip. And unless we take a stand at some point very soon, we will find the basic needs of ordinary humans are being eaten into. And we're being told, you can't do this, you can't have that. And we will find that we don't have access to the foods we need. Farmers don't even have access to the genuine seeds, only genetically modified varieties. Consumers don't have access to some of the basic and fundamental needs they are accustomed to. So my belief is we should all now be preparing ourselves for a simpler, a more realistic, actually a more healthy and genuinely more earthed way of life. And that, in a sense, would be the beginning of a solution to the entire concept of the industrialization of the planet and this phony democracy, which has got a firm control over almost everything that takes place.
Yeah.
I get so cross when people say, oh, these ministers, they're so incompetent. This is not incompetence, is it? It's ridiculous.
It's malfeasance in public office and treason. And I'm going to hold up the proof that it is treason. This is the Bradbury Pound. This is Treasury money created by the government that's debt-free, interest-free, because it's based on the wealth, the credit, and the labour potential, the creativity of the country. And it saved the economy in August 1914 at the outbreak of the First World War, when literally the British government, basically the Bank of England was totally private in those days. It's now just privately controlled. But in those days, it was actually private itself. And they created the notes, the £1, £5 notes, whatever. And they were meant to be backed by gold. But because they fraudulently created many times more notes, the Bank of England suddenly realized there's going to be a run on the banks because there just wasn't enough gold to, when people wanted to get something tangible out in the uncertainty of war, they wanted to get their gold out to exchange the notes for gold. There wasn't enough gold. So the British government in 3 days created the Bradbury Pound. There it is, signed by Sir John.
So it can be done. And in fact,
this is the key.
Right. Well, let's talk about this, because I've obviously, Justin, I first encountered you now, it must be 10 years ago, outside Parliament. I think you were speaking with UK Column, and it was budget day. Yeah. And you were there talking about the Bradbury Pound. And I should say that I doorstepped Sadiq Khan, who's obviously now the Mayor of London, twice, offering him literature to do with the Bradbury Pound. And obviously he's a complete WEF character, and pushing through all the Green New Deal and everything, while our people continue to get stabbed up on the street. But don't you worry, because we have rainbow crossings. And so he's an obviously idiot, is Sadiq Khan, as indeed are many of these people. And I don't hold back from saying so. But the Bradbury Pound is, so this is what you are offering in this letter. Is this a realistic solution?
Totally 100% realistic. And it's all about this. If it worked in 1914 and they saved the British economy from collapse, then if they've got this 50 billion black hole in the country's finances to fill, rather than tax people, rather than create misery, further misery to people, it's simple. You take part of your overall wealth, and the Office of National Statistics will tell you that our country is worth around £30 trillion, and you use some of that to create liquidity needed to run our services, to look after our infrastructure, and to make sure that everyone is happy, prosperous, and their immediate needs are met. That's it. And it won't cause inflation, because you retire money, you control inflation. But the most important thing is you put money creation back into public hands. At the moment, everything is run by secret unaccountable, unelected people, private people. And this has now got to stop. But it's only happening because people don't understand money creation and money supply.
Absolutely.
And I'm an economist. I just practice common sense.
Right, exactly. But see, here's the thing, is that if this sounds like a very simple solution, but is it too simple a solution? Are there issues attached to it that would lead us down very dark paths?
Well, no, I mean, only if the other side is still active and they can try and take us down. What we want more than anything else is to harness the wisdom of our nation. Rather than political parties, rather than career politicians, the time has come now to literally harness wisdom. Get people with experience, people who are not on a career path, people who don't want to climb greasy poles. They just want to care for people, look after people. And there are so many good people out there. You meet them every day. You know, people who just walk the streets and that you know that they are genuinely good people, but they have no part to play in the decision-making process because that's been hijacked.
Yes,
right.
I'd like to add to that, Sonia, if I might, that I think the best way for people to grasp this, because it sounds rather a large issue,
yes,
the entire nation, is to bring things down to the local level and the district level and say, well, what about localized people's banking in your local village, for example? Well, you could see in your local village roughly the sort of asset value of that village and maybe of the people living in it. And you could set a sort of target of that as being the basic asset value of your banking arrangement. And then people could say, look, we don't like tax, we can't see the point in tax, but at the very local level, I'm willing to put a few quid towards building a new center for children, you know, or a new place where we can grow food, organic food or something. And then it's a completely different state of affairs. You've got at the local level, taking back control of our destinies and using responsible attitude that Justin's described to actually make results happen in front of our own eyes. It's too abstract at the moment. Everything's virtual. And we're sitting behind computers and using mobile phones, and it's getting even more virtual by the day.
Yes.
Earth it, and come back.
And banks are closing on the daily.
Yeah. We want community banks. We need community banks. Something that Julian hasn't said, but he's too modest, is actually he was the one who introduced the new king to organic farming.
What?
And yes, he's far too modest. That's what I like about him. But we have a new king who, part of him is totally supporting what we're saying. But the other part, he's with the World Economic Forum. And so we have this, well, I can't even begin to describe it. What is going on? Because
that is the question.
Yeah.
I think very decent people struggle to believe that we could be run by such treasonous, traitorous people. They struggle to believe that because for the most part, I believe that most people are essentially good and they don't conduct themselves in this way. But these people we're talking about, they surely are not just motivated by money. There must be other motivations in place for this situation to have been created.
Yes, there must be. And this is a very interesting subject, worthy of a whole other program, I expect. But essentially, I think you'll find that there's this club, which is what it is. I remember the first time I went to the House of Commons, and then I had a cousin who was a Lord, and he invited me to the House of Lords. I was quite overwhelmed by the sense of a private club, which was incredibly at ease with itself. So much at ease with itself that it only viewed the whole world from that position of superiority, ease, master control of everything that's going on. Right. So I think if you grow up or you're trained into, like Klaus Schwab's young leaders, if you're trained into that environment, it's far too cozy and important and self-ego ingratiating to ever want to step out of. So they live in that reality. And we live in another reality, and of course, there's a massive clash.
Absolutely, because they're indoctrinated and don't want to give up the lifestyle that they've been indoctrinated into, and it is very much an us and them. Yes, Justin?
Well, I just say that I was only told about the Bradbury by a gentleman who was on his deathbed, got his son to ring me. And this gentleman, who was very elderly, was actually a director of the Bank of England with my uncle. who at the time was a director from 1955 to 1972. So he was there for a long time. But the year before that, in 1954, the year before I was born, he went to the very first Bilderberg Group meeting, actually at the Hotel Bilderberg, representing British industry. It is a club. I mean, there's no ifs and buts. One moment you go to Bilderberg, next moment you're a director of the Bank of England.
Right.
And I also happen to know he used to dine or have private luncheons with the Queen and the Duke on a regular basis on talking about the economy and stuff. So it's all kept in-house. But there are a lot of people there on the inside who I think are now desperate to get the truth out. And that's how I heard about the Bradbury.
Well, thank goodness for that, because there will be people who are watching this saying, never heard about the Bradbury Pound. And as you accurately say in this letter, it's been airbrushed from history, which in itself, I think, is very interesting, isn't it? What could possibly be the reason for them doing that?
Well, yes, exactly. What could be? Well, I think actually it's very interesting, isn't it, in a way, that the attempt to keep information entirely under one's own control and calling this education and keeping people safe from such horrors as COVID, it's all supposed to be in support of keeping us in a state of a little cage, rather like birds who grow up only in little cages. Sometimes they think they're rather lucky because they get fed every day.
Absolutely.
They get given some water, they get given everything. And they're quite convinced, I think, that all of us are going to be quite happy to be slaves under the system that they've invented.
You will own nothing and you will be happy. God damn it.
And could I also just come in here and say that something we haven't mentioned is that hovering over all of us is a sort of Damocles, which we don't even understand. I don't think even they understand it properly. And this is a thing called the derivatives debt bubble.
Right.
And this amounts at the moment to, I've got the figure, $1.5 quadrillion. Quadrillion.
I mean, how do you even calculate something like that?
It's a ludicrous thing, because this is money that's been created. Basically, they're betting on futures. I don't understand it because I'm not an economist, but something to do with betting on futures and what have you. But this is what they're going to use at some point to burst, to awash the markets with debt, to create the panic, to then obviously justify the Great Reset and everything else. So that is what we are fearful of, because it's a ludicrous. I mean, under the common law, you just annul it because it doesn't exist. Like our national debt. I mean, our national debt, I wrote it down, coming up to 2.5 trillion pounds, 2.5 trillion pounds. Now, the interest we're paying each month on that is unbelievable. So again, all that money's been arrived at. And I forgot to mention here, William Paterson, the Bank of England, when they founded the Bank of England in 1694, William Paterson, who was the co-founder, he actually said, you can check it out, the Bank of England have benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. And there you have the whole system in a nutshell.
And that is exactly it. Yes, Julian?
No, I said it's a great conjuring trick, isn't it?
Yes,
it's one of the hardest things for any of us to understand is when we take out a loan. Actually, we're not being given any money.
No.
But we are paying interest immediately on it.
Yes.
And therefore, we're paying the banks. Well, very simply put.
Well, well, we need it to be simple. And so you have a 10-point plan here that you're asking of our Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Seems absolutely fair to me. Can't for a second think they'll agree to it. And I don't have time to go through every point, but let's go through some of them. You say announce with immediate effect that the entire lawful part of the British economy is now supported and underpinned by real credit, wealth and creativity of the British nation. Order that the Bank of England, which is ultimately controlled by the BIS, is to cease being a separate and independent entity. Sever with immediate effect all connections with the BIS and its privately controlled central banking system. I mean, it goes on. Where can people see this letter?
Well, we have a website, and I've written it down because I've actually kind of tried to remember it, and it's hardwickalliance.org. hardwickalliance.org. And if you go on there, you'll see the letter there in all its glory, plus all the other work that Hardwick Alliance for Real Ecology are doing, or HARE. and we have a wonderful logo of a cartoon hare looking at a signpost, and in one direction it says tyranny, and the other direction it says freedom. And one wit, and I love this, when the wit told me this, I fell about laughing. He said, what you have is the perfect logo. You've got Klaus Schwab meet Beatrix Potter.
I mean, the thing is that it's so much needed here, but the importance of this letter, regardless of whether they respond or not, which they won't, is it actually sets a marker. This, you have set out quite clearly what will happen should they fail to act on this. And you say, by executing these 10 clear instructions, Great Britain and the United Kingdom would become completely impervious to the unlawful machinations and totalitarian ambitions of the World Economic Forum and the Bank for International Settlements. Quite a statement there, gentlemen.
Yes, it's a strong statement, and actually it applies to greater areas than Great Britain, of course. This is a political situation which covers the planet in many respects, because as I think we've all noticed, especially during COVID, that a set of rules are passed in one country, particularly USA or Britain, and all simultaneously they appear everywhere in the world.
Yes, globalization
proves, I think, that we're dealing, with this very, very small elitist group who are really pulling all the levers. So the implication, I think, is that this could apply to almost any country in the world and not just to England.
Right. And
could I just say that Ronald Bernard, the banker, said there are only 8,000 people who really run the world. And the population of the world has just reached 8 billion. So that's one of them for every million of us. I think the odds are in our favour.
It's extraordinary. I absolutely believe in people power. People just have to be aware of what is happening. It's really that simple in many respects. But what you're asking for appears to me to be an act for humanity. And yes. I feel that to any minister who is prepared to ignore it is quite clearly not acting in our best interest. I just want you to, both of you, to give our viewers an understanding of what Rishi Sunak is supporting, and that is obviously central bank digital currency. How would that impact us?
I mean, the word impact us is a very good one. I think what it would do would simply mean that we are surveyed and controlled 24/7 under an electronic system, which is going to come through our mobile phones if we've got one. I don't have one. I haven't had one for 25 years. It's going to be rather interesting for people who don't have a mobile phone. We're going to be completely outside society, actually, because everything's going to come electronically. Okay, it can come for your laptop as well and other things. But in people's imagination, I think they can figure that it's very easy to control a system if you only have to push a few buttons and the result goes out to billions of people. And the result has to be obeyed very much in the way that Big Brother was operating through George Orwell's writing. And this Big Brother is people like Sunak, frankly. I think they've all got backgrounds in banking now. I remember once upon a time there were lawyers in government. And you know what? Before that, there were farmers. It's an interesting thought, isn't it?
What a different world we're living in. Justin, for somebody who's just picking up this subject now, and I know it will be of great interest to our viewers, what is the sort of take-home message that you'd like to leave with people?
Well, I was just, when Julian was just speaking then, I suddenly, the word doomsday came up, doomsday.
Right.
Because in 1085, William I had the Doomsday Book written, which was basically to see what his kingdom had and what I can tax. In other words, it was about control. So the central bank digital currencies coupled with a social credit system, I suppose in a way is a sort of new doomsday book, because it is all about having total access to all information that controls people. So I'm just thinking aloud now, we might start to use the doomsday book as an example of, back in 1085, a few people wanted to control the many. Well, it's exactly the same.
Here we are again. Here we are again.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we have people like both of you at the forefront of this, trying to turn it around, which I greatly appreciate. Everybody, Justin Walker and Sir Julian Rose of the Hardwick Alliance for Real Ecology, out there fighting for all of us. Please support these gentlemen. Pass on the word, the Bradbury Pound, the Bradbury Pound. Take good care of yourself. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Really important stuff that these men are doing, and we need to get behind them, because this is for all of us. I mean, this is a tyranny that we are walking into unless we actually take action.